Welcome, and thank you everyone for joining us here today for this webinar as part of the USAID CEADIR discussion series. I'm Michael O'Mealy, and our topic today focuses on how to accelerate private sector investment and finance for clean energy development in Asia, and particularly in Southeast Asia. We have two global thought leaders with us today who are working at the leading edge of these issues, working with governments, investors, banks, project developers, and corporations across the region. And before introducing our speakers, I'd like to share a little information about this CEADIR discussion series. CEADIR's full name is Climate Economic Analysis for Development, Investment, and Resilience, and it's a 5-year USAID-funded project that is helping countries to scale up low-carbon, climate-resilient development. CEADIR supports countries in conducting the economic, financial, and other analyses needed to make the business and economic case for taking strategic climate actions. As part of the CEADIR project, this discussion series engages public, private, and civic sector leaders from around the world in exploring the most critical issues related to climate change, clean energy development, and sustainable landscapes management. And through connecting with global innovators and practitioners such as yourselves, all of you joining us here today, we're able to share and build on each other's experiences and in the process become more effective as a global community in our collective efforts. For our agenda today, I'll give a quick introduction to set the stage for our topic and then turn it over to our first featured speaker, M.K. Balaji, who serves as the Chief of Party for the Private Finance Advisory Network for Asia, or PFAN Asia. Balaji will share insights to help project developers access more finance in the region and build strong clean energy pipelines to meet growing demands. And Balaji, thank you so much for joining us here today from Bangkok. Then we have Boonrod Yawapruik, who is the Investment Mobilization Lead for the USAID-funded Clean Power Asia Initiative. Boonrod will discuss the role of public finance in reducing risks for private investors, as well as structured finance to help mobilize additional private sector capital for renewable energy development at a larger scale, with a focus on solar and wind in Southeast Asia. And Boonrod, also, thank you very much for joining us here from Bangkok today as well. And then the most important part of our event today is an open forum during which we'll ask for your questions to Balaji and Boonrod on these issues. So please be thinking about what you'd like to ask and start typing in your questions using the webinar comments field at any time during our presentations. So to set the stage, as many of you know, Asia is a powerhouse of global economic growth, and more Asia is leading in our global efforts to address climate change. Governments in the region are committed to implementing their national climate change targets under the Paris Agreement and are actively working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote sustainable development while also meeting increasing energy demands. Leading corporations in the region have embraced the business case for clean energy and ambitious climate action as well. As an example, more than 100 global companies have now joined an initiative called RE100, pledging to fuel their operations with 100% renewable energy in the coming years. In Asia's dynamic markets, however, companies with supply chains that span multiple countries often face challenges in meeting their clean energy goals. At the same time, governments are seeking financing to scale up clean energy deployment. And as a result of this disconnect, public and private sector leaders are missing opportunities to meet their respective clean energy targets, to reduce climate risks, secure cost-effective energy supplies, support local job creation, and together foster greater societal health and economic well-being. Increased public-private sector collaboration is absolutely needed in order to mobilize private sector investment at scale to address the financing and investment gap. Corporate demand for renewable energy has the potential to catalyze change in the energy sector and regulatory environment much more broadly, as we've seen recently in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. And this slide shows the scale of corporate renewable energy deals over the last 5 years in the US and Mexico as an example. where large corporate buyers have purchased more than 5 gigawatts of renewable energy since 2005 in the last 2 years alone. And many of these corporations, Google, Apple, Walmart, IKEA, Mars, Amazon, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, and other RE100 members, have significant operations and supply chains in Southeast Asia and are looking to increase their investment in renewables here in the coming years. Key to unlocking this potential will be to improve the enabling environments in each country to accelerate private sector investment and really enable it at scale. And this is where leadership from governments is absolutely essential to implement policies and regulations to create a favorable investment climate, as well as grid management strategies that integrate solar, wind, and other renewables in the distribution network. Linking project developers with investors and sources of finance is also key in order to develop robust clean energy project pipelines that will meet private and public sector needs and demands in the coming years. Our presentations today will discuss current trends, showcase emerging strategies, and highlight recommendations developed from public-private sector workshops in Southeast Asia in March and June, where leaders identified regional and country-specific priority actions to enable clean energy investment at scale. And this is important because in key markets, including Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and others, many government leaders are asking for clear signals from the private sector on what's needed in order to accelerate private investment and finance toward our common objectives. At a regional level, we've found that these recommendations fall into 3 key themes. Improve the policy and regulatory environment for clean energy investment, strengthen the finance ecosystem for clean energy development, and increase government capacities and public-private sector collaboration. And I'll briefly step through the recommendations in each of these regional themes and then show some country-specific priority actions identified by private sector leaders. So regionally, to improve the policy and regulatory environment, the top priority actions needed as identified by private sector leaders in Southeast Asia include reviewing and revising existing policies and regulations that currently conflict with renewable energy development goals or which are creating market uncertainties for investors. Instituting new policies and incentives that provide clear direction for private sector investment in renewables. Preparing actionable energy sector plans with targets for renewables, and improving electricity price forecasting to also allow cost-reflective tariffs that consider changing technologies and enable renewables to compete. To strengthen the finance ecosystem for clean energy projects, the 2 region-wide priority actions identified by private sector leaders include developing the capacity of domestic commercial banks to increase clean energy lending and obtain additional capital, and helping domestic clean energy project developers access more finance. And Balaji and Boonrod will each share some important new insights on these 2 topics in particular. And the third theme, increasing government capacity and public-private sector collaboration, included 3 top priority actions identified by private sector leaders. Improving government capacities at national and subnational levels to support and promote markets for renewables, increasing government engagement with multiple private sector stakeholders to understand their needs and priorities, and increasing collaboration between government agencies and the private sector on strategic pilot or demonstration projects as proof of concept to open the door for greater investment and enabling policies and incentives. And now I'll just briefly run through country-specific recommendations developed by corporate leaders who are working in these 3 markets, three of these key markets, just to illustrate the very different needs in each country in order to enable private sector clean energy investment and finance at scale. In Indonesia, private sector leaders recommended that the government establish a buyers alliance of domestic and international renewable energy purchasers and developers to provide input to the government on policies and regulations. relax restrictions on private investment and foreign ownership of renewable energy projects, support investments in renewable energy demonstration at the state level, especially for solar, work with the private sector to initiate new business models at the national level, also again, particularly for solar, bundle small investments in order to increase access to international funds, create an agency to provide loan guarantees for renewable energy investments, and provide technical assistance to banks and financial institutions on screening renewable energy loan applications, and finally, work with international companies and finance institutions to increase the capacity of domestic project developers for preparing high-quality technical and finance documents. In the Philippines, private sector leaders recommended that the government take a kind of a different set of priority actions. First, finalize and implement some draft renewable portfolio standards that the government is working on. Ensure that there are clear policies on ownership and attribution of renewable energy assets in contracts, and clarify these rules for retail energy suppliers and off-takers. Institute net metering for installations larger than the current 100 kilowatt cap. Launch a national information and education campaign on renewable energy certificates. Increase the ease of doing business through an electronic one-stop shop for clean energy permits. Facilitate access to early-stage project preparation finance to address capital gaps for small clean energy project developers. And explore green tariffs for private consumers. And then as a last example, in Vietnam, private sector leaders recommended that the government provide detailed information on the power sector reform roadmap and projected tariffs by year. Review the electricity law and move away from a strict single off-taker purchase model where Vietnam Electricity is the single off-taker. Provide better estimates for future electricity prices, develop renewable portfolio standards, develop and pilot a bankable direct power purchase agreement, which is an agreement between a renewable energy generator and an end user in which the renewable energy produced is physically delivered to power the buyer's operations. Encourage corporations to make renewable energy purchase commitments. Improve the capacity of the domestic banking sector to engage in clean energy lending. Create foreign direct investment opportunities that can attract large companies. Improve public-private sector dialogue and ensure meaningful engagement. And finally, increase the capacity of government authorities in competitive energy procurements. So again, we see very different priority actions recommended in each country to enable private sector investment in finance at scale. And some of the key takeaways that are from this work that are informing our activities and our collaborations going forward include, again, governments are asking for clear signals from the private sector on what's needed to accelerate private investment and finance for clean energy development in their countries, helping them to achieve their national climate change targets and broader economic and social development goals. In many countries, private sector leaders are moving toward forming and conveying their recommendations to governments in a unified voice. And a great example of this is the Vietnam Business Forum, which includes leading Vietnamese and multinational companies, and which delivered last October its Made in Vietnam Energy Plan to government officials, recommending policy and regulatory changes to enable private investment at scale in the country. And finally, we're finding that regional peer learning is proving invaluable in allowing public and private sector leaders to share their perspectives in neutral forums, to also strengthen and form new coalitions, and to reinforce the urgency of collective action in helping to achieve both corporate and country goals. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce M.K. Balaji, who will share insights on current trends in clean energy finance in Asia and new information to help project developers access more finance in order to build strong clean energy investment pipelines. Balaji is the chief of party for PFAN Asia, which works to mobilize private sector funding for clean energy projects across 12 countries in South and Southeast Asia. Balaji has deep expertise in extensive technical, project development, and investment management experience in Asia, holding various board and C-level positions. He was the director and member of the investment committee at a private equity fund called FE Clean Energy, and previously worked with South Pole Carbon Group and Thermofax Limited. And with that, Balaji, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Michael, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and hello. It's a pleasure meeting you on this webinar. To start with, PFAN is a global program, and it is housed under UNIDO. The Asian component of the program is funded by USAID, and this has been over 2 phases so far, with the first phase commencing in 2009, and the second one since 2013, which will end next year. We at Deloitte Consulting are the implementation partner for USAID for this second phase. Our targets are to mobilize $700 million in clean energy financing and bring about a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 21 million tons equivalent of CO2 projected through 2030. We are also mandated to create a local operating platform for PFAN in Asia beyond the Deloitte operations, which will end next year. And we have identified a partner, and we are building their capacity right now. As Michael mentioned, we work across 12 countries in South and Southeast Asia. In the 2 phases that PFAN has operated in Asia so far, we have mobilized $800 million in finance for clean energy projects and combined projected GHG emission reductions of 46 million tons through 2030. What do we do? PFAN actually supports projects by either one or a combination of these mechanisms, which you can see here. We identify projects and we quickly perform an investment readiness assessment that helps us identify the strengths and weaknesses, which we then focus on for providing coaching and mentoring of these projects. We also seek feedback from investors and experts at this stage on the projects. Once a project has been admitted after performing the investment readiness assessment, we provide strategic advisory and mentoring services, which some of you have, in the earlier poll I saw people wanted de-risking of financing. At this stage, we focus a lot on providing inputs for de-risking financing of the projects. So through the process of strategic advisory and coaching, we help improve the investment profile of these projects, during which time we could consider to provide tipping point technical assistance across faculties. It could be legal, it could be technical, it could be other things like resource assessment, etc. So whatever it takes to finish, to reach the finish line to funding. And then the final phase in which we get involved is financing facilitation, either through one-on-one introductions or through broadcasting the project to our database of investors, and also through roadshows and investor forums. These do not have to necessarily go in a sequence, except that the investment readiness assessment is done. Some projects which are quite mature could straight away go to financial facilitation. Some projects may not need strategic advisory and coaching. They may just need some tipping point assistance. So that's why they have not been presented sequentially, but in a circular fashion. So now to understand the PFAN global setup. Globally, PFAN is housed under UNIDO, who manages the funding from the donors. The administration and the secretariat is managed by REAP, which is also another clean energy program. And REAP liaises with regional operators and other network partners. In the future, the Sustainable Asia Regional Platform which I just mentioned earlier, will coordinate with REAP for program implementation in the region. So as a program, in the second phase, the phase that we are operating right now, since September 2013 until date, we have mobilized $537 million in financing across 44 projects, bringing about a total projected GHG reduction of over 16 million tons. This is the finance mobilized by countries, Vietnam contributing a substantial part, largely because of the uptake in the wind sector early on. India following next with about $62 million. Thailand ended up close to $60 million. Then Bangladesh, another $30 million, and the rest of them about $78 million. Looking across technologies, we had a huge wind uptake in Vietnam, followed by biomass. When our program started, biomass was still a growing technology field, followed by solar, then hydropower. And interestingly, you'll see that we have done work in the clean transport sector as well. And we've done a lot of work in the energy efficiency sector, which is, which needs a lot of hand-holding and bundling. You might be wondering why there is a very small component of solar here, though there has been a lot of activity in the solar sector in this region. The next slide shall give you some explanation to that. So we as PFAN, we largely focus on small and medium sector enterprises and not those mega projects that you might have heard in the press. Though we have supported certain larger projects in the wind sector in Vietnam, but those were really at a very fledgling stage when they needed our kind of support. So when PFAN is kind of based on a thesis that there is an oversupply of projects that are not appropriately developed and structured to the satisfaction of investors. And on the other hand, there is sufficiently large amount of capital interested to invest in this sector. So we are often called the missing middle that works with these projects to help and improve their investment profile through our processes of coaching and mentoring. What value does the PFAN network have? We have a well-established relationship with over 200 different types of investors, which we will show in the next slides, and we understand their preferences quite well. This helps us pitch the appropriate projects to them. I mean, so we can actually slice and dice the right projects for the right investor. We have, based on the current applicable trends in a certain region or a country, or for a preference for a certain technology, we are able to aggregate several smaller project opportunities and bring about a uniformity so that the investors then are able to take a view as a geographical location or as a sector. Otherwise, these projects would look pretty scattered. How do we achieve this? We achieve this through a very strong network of mentors. Mentors are the backbone and strength of our program. And these mentors are usually professionals with a rich experience in project development and financing and also in operations of projects. Let's now look at the investor profile that we have. I mentioned that we have over 200 investors in our network. Not surprising that the highest preferred technology is solar, with almost like 20% of the investors clearly preferring to invest in solar. But it's not, the other technologies are not very far behind, energy efficiency or biomass or wind. What we have seen that a well-developed project with a reasonable risk-return profile is preferred irrespective of the technology. There are some who are very specific to technology, but largely it's not the case. In terms of funding types, as you can see, another popular demand that we have from several of our project developers is, can we get a grant? But across the spectrum of investors, there are less than 2% of those who would be interested in giving you a grant. A large number of investors are actually interested in providing equity and debt. And in debt, we have split this into two sectors. One is project debt, which is project finance, and the other one is corporate debt. And corporate debt is the great enabler for the private sector to leverage this opportunity to accelerate clean energy mix in their use of clean energy in their operations. So coming to the types of funds that we have mobilized so far, and again, it's not surprising that only 1% of all the funds that we have mobilized are grants. A large part is equity, and about 60% is debt. It is possible to leverage equity in some of the markets where the enabling environment is favorable, such as India, Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia. And here we have supported projects also in mobilizing debt. Vendor financing is a very emerging offering, especially in the solar sector and the wind sector. More so in the solar sector now, both in the on-grid and off-grid areas. And this is also like through several interesting business models that are evolving right now. Well, that's all from me, and we would be glad to provide support to your projects, and please feel free to drop me a line on the contact details provided here. Thank you, and I shall hand over this to Boon Rod now.
Actually, Balaji, thank you so much for those excellent insights and for the work that you and your team are doing on these issues across Asia. It's just every time you and I meet and connect and have a chance to collaborate, I'm just so impressed with what you have been able to achieve in terms of mobilizing investment and finance for clean energy development across the region. So we really appreciate you joining us here and sharing kind of an overview of what you've done and what you're learning on these issues. Before we move to Boonrod, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us here today again on this webinar for the excellent questions that you're typing in now, some of which we will, Balaji, I'm going to ask you to address before we move to Boonrod's presentation because they're clarifying questions for you, and others that people are typing in are excellent questions for us to address more fully during our discussion session right after Boonrod's presentation. So everyone, please keep your questions coming. Those are excellent. Balaji, 3 quick clarifying questions for you. One from Shanti Kleeman asks, does PFAN advise on financing for projects that are 1 to 10 megawatts in size, or is that too big? And if so, what is the best way to put our Indonesia team in touch with a local PFAN rep? And maybe, Balaji, if you could address that really quickly, I'll ask you 2 more clarifying questions.
Yes, we do. It's best that your Indonesia person can get in touch with me. Indonesia has also got a on-the-ground USAID funded program that can also support. So please drop me a line and I shall definitely take it up. We also have a local rep in Indonesia for PFAN. So between us, we can discuss, and whichever is the best supporting mechanism, we can provide that.
Great. Thank you so much, Balaji. A second question from Dumana Aso. What type of energy efficiency does PFAN mobilize funding for, and in what form, debt or equity, and what types of sectors or industries? If you could just address that really quickly.
So hospitality has been a big area where we have worked on energy efficiency projects. Street lighting, converting inefficient CFLs to LEDs. That's another area where our project has worked on energy efficiency. And a third area is in universities. So these 3 are key areas in universities and, say, schools and learning institutions where we have worked. Industrial energy efficiency also we have worked on a programmatic basis. So we've helped raise some corporate debt for industrial energy efficiency.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Balaji. And then a third clarifying final question before we move on to Boonrad's presentation. This one from Obinda Gershon. Are there issues or opportunities that are common to Southeast Asia and Africa? And if so, how could one get in touch with PFAN Africa since PFAN is a global program?
So I just typed a reply. PFAN has a very strong operation in Africa. If you drop me a line, I'll connect you up with the coordinator for Africa. There are a lot of differences. The programs that we see in Africa are much smaller. The requirement for funds per project is much smaller. And the regulatory environment is not very supportive in many parts. But having said that, Africa has created some very innovative business solutions, and people are interested in investing in Africa. So please, reach out to me. My email is out there, and I'll be happy to connect you with our Africa coordinators.
Great. Thank you so much, Balaji. And then I'm going to introduce Boonrad momentarily. I just wanted to mention that CEADIR's Chief of Party, Marcy Trump, is also joining us on the webinar today. Thanks so much, Marcy. And as you can see in the comment field, Marcy has mentioned that CEADIR is also advising on financing of clean energy projects with specific assistance to West Africa and Central America, working with a number of banks and USAID's Development Credit Authority. And in addition, we're very open to working in Asia and other countries on these issues as well. We have been doing a lot of work in Asia on similar issues. So thanks, everyone. Please keep those excellent questions coming. And it is now my true pleasure to introduce Boonrad Yawapruek from the USAID Clean Power Asia Initiative to discuss the role of public finance in reducing risks for private investors and structured finance to mobilize private capital for renewable energy development at a larger scale, focusing in particular on solar and wind in Southeast Asia. Boonrad is a clean energy finance specialist with more than 15 years of experience in technical and managerial support. He serves as investment mobilization lead for Clean Power Asia, which is a 5-year program to increase grid-connected renewable energy in the lower Mekong countries. Over his career, Boonrad has mobilized more than $200 million in climate finance and more than $100 million in project financing in Asia, including for renewable energy development. He has a master's degree in sustainable energy engineering from the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, and we are thrilled to have him joining us here today. So with that, Boonrad, I turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So wherever you are. Just to start, so I would like to give a little bit background on the program I'm supporting on called USAID Clean Power Asia. So as Michael mentioned, our program Clean Power Asia, we are the 5 years program start last year, and the program will last until June 2021. The main goal of the program is to increase the deployment of grid-connected renewable energy projects in Asia. At the moment, we focus on four countries in lower Mekong countries: Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. But we also provide services to other countries in ASEAN as well. The main goal that we have for the program is to support the government in order to propose the new policy to allow more RE to be on the grid, and also to support private and public sector to mobilize 750 million USD, and as well as to support private sector to install more than 500 megawatt projects, and of course to reduce greenhouse gas emission reduction by 3.5 million ton of CO2. And then the question is how we supporting private sector and public sector in order to achieve our goals. So we have laid out our 3 main fundamentals tools that we supporting both public and private sector, starting from on the left hand side, provide support to government in terms of setting RE scenario planning and target. And the second tasks we provide to improve policy enabling environment for a policymaker in order to have more smart policy and incentive for the government. And lastly, we also supporting private sector to mobilize investment in the region. As you can see below, we have the chart just to show in order to effectively supporting private and public sector to mobilize and scale up investment in the region. Actually, different countries, they have their own situation, and we have to understand where they are at the moment. In some country, they may need to work more on planning and policy, but in some country, they already ready and move forward in terms of scale up the investment. So basically, in our program, we provide the target setting, meaning that we helping the countries to know exactly where they would like to go for the RE target, but more like setting the target. And then in terms of improve policy, so we build the load for the countries to go to the target that they want. And lastly, for mobilize investment or scale up the market, we provide them the car to go to where they want to go in terms of the target. And of course, we're gonna provide the EV in order for them to go there. So that's the overall picture of our Clean Power Asia program. So let's look at the figure now on what we have available in ASEAN countries, starting from wind power projects. So for the last 10 years, as you can see here, we lay out different countries in ASEAN, but we can see that only 3 countries has been active of wind power project installed the last 10. So there are some reasons behind these 3 countries. Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam had done something better than the other countries, and those questions and answer is related to what Michael and Balaji mentioned before in terms of private sector recommendation to improve policy incentive and also access to finance. If we look at the solar power projects installation, it's the same thing happen. If we compare from wind power project installation and solar project installation, we can see that actually there are different countries who perform better in wind projects, and some countries perform better in solar PV projects. So that means that it doesn't mean that when country perform well in wind projects, they will have more installation in solar PV projects, because the RE project is quite gonna be technology specific, and risk that attached to them is quite different compared to different sector and different countries. So this is also the main thing that our Clean Power Asia program now is working on, trying to understand what the reason behind the countries who perform best and the country who not performing, and try to introduce and fill in the gap for that for those governments. This slide we show available incentive and tools and target that each country have in the ASEAN. If we looking back compared to the previous slide in terms of what they have installed and what they have in terms of there are 4 main tools that has been popular and then used by different governments. So the first one is of course setting the RE target. When they have the target, so they can decide the policy and incentive to meet the target. And the most popular tools that they are using now in the region is FIT policy and also the tax incentive. And in Thailand, Indonesia, and 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 Malaysia, they have also the soft loan, which also help to fill in the financing gap of the project. Fundamentally, when we are evaluating what kind of support from USAID Clean Power Asia that we could support the government and private sector, we looking deeply at the risk reward profile of the asset in different countries and different projects. There are 2 more rules that we have to remember. The first one is the risk reward profile of the asset must be attractive to the investor, because investor normally they can select and pick the asset that match to their profile and what they want. And secondly, different investors have different risk appetite, meaning that there are some type of investor they want high risk, high return, but another type they might want low risk or return. So the government or the private sector or the donor, we have to structure the project that to match with the risk reward profile and the appetite of the investor. And three main factors that have influence on risk reward return. The first one is the risk. The second one is cost, and lastly is the revenue. Cost and revenue actually is the contribution to the return of the project. And when we look at this slide, it shows the risk reward profile of example of wind and solar projects that we have in the region. In some market, if we compare to the chart earlier, why they don't have any projects installed in those countries for solar and wind, because the risk reward profile is not attractive enough for the investor to participate in the country. So the role for us as the donor program or the government, we have to shift the curve, meaning that we should reduce the risk of the project or increase the financial return of the project in order to make the project more feasible or bankable from the investor point of view. We can see the x-axis is the risk size, so we can lower the risk. In this case, example is the guarantee access to the grid. And on the y-axis side, we can increase the return by increase the price premium. But another way to also increase the financial return is also reduce the cost of the projects. So today we will discuss several types, these three main factors on what should be done in order to make the cheapest cost available in order to make the project more bankable. If we look at the cost, the risk and expected return. So basically the investor, they have expected return depend on the risk associated with projects. There are three main risks involved when we invest in the projects in different countries. First is the country risk. Second is sectoral risk, and lastly is the project risk. These three premium risk can add on top of the risk-free rate, which is gonna be the expected return of the investor at the end of the day. So in order to reduce risk from the investor, um, what we can do is that the risk that normally we have in each category, there are some perceived risk. The key thing is for the government and from donor program is how to ensure that the risk that we have is reduced as much as possible. So investor only face the actual risk and they don't have to face the perceived risk. So if we can do that, meaning that the expected return of the investor gonna be lower and make the project gonna be more bankable and easily to get finance from the investor. Um, from the country risk, we can have like policy and currency and economic risk. And sectoral risk, we have mainly policy and regulatory risk, and project risk is concerned with resource and technology risk. So that's the main thing that we can do. So we can reduce the expected risk from the project, and so we can make the project more bankable. And the second thing we can help to scale up the investment in this sector is to reduce cost. And there are two major costs when developing RE projects: the soft cost and the hard cost, which is the hardware or the project's installation cost. But basically, that especially for smaller size of projects, there sometimes soft cost could be higher up to 50% of the project cost. So one of the things that our program USAID Asia trying to do is identify options and ways how can we reduce soft costs for the projects. So we lay out some phases in terms of development, financing, and construction, and what we can do to improve project bankability by reducing costs and sharing the risk allocation. In this case, we lay out, for example, in development phase, we can streamline permitting process or standardize contract or provide platform for the projects to develop. And in financing part, we can also develop investment guideline in order to guide the investor and developer on how to get financing and reduce risk for project structuring. And On the construction side, we can also provide standard EPC contracts and insurance products in order to reduce risk. And on the right-hand side, you can already see in order to increase access to finance, Balaji already mentioned several types of investors that are available in the market. Our program can also help to support to match and provide facilitate the transaction like PFAN project as well. This is an example of what we are currently doing and support in the region. So we are providing, developing a PPA template for solar PV rooftop in Thailand, starting in Thailand, and we plan to roll out this kind of template to Vietnam and Cambodia and other countries in the future. This template is more like for private PPA, so third-party financing model, because we see a lot of people starting to develop this kind of template by their own. But if there's someone organization to develop this template to share the risk properly, we think we can scale up the investment easily compared to without the template. And lastly, the last tool that we have is the risk premium tool. But just want to say the example of this tool is, for example, if the government want to provide more return for the projects by 1%. In this case, we provide example if the government launching 1,000 megawatt wind power projects and each project costs $2 million USD per megawatt. Increasing price premium for the program will cost the government around 20 million USD per year, or if the PPA they have 20 years term, it's gonna cost 240 million USD for the government. So it shows that actually price premium policy is pretty expensive for the government to absorb that cost, comparing to option that I just mentioned, reducing risk and reducing cost for the developer. So the key takeaway is public sector can play an important role to establish grid-connected RE projects. And they need also private sector to be much more involved. And there are several tools to improve risk-reward profile. But the government should concern and consider the most cheapest available tools, which is the structured finance, reducing cost, or risk mitigation tool, or reducing risk, comparing to just setting up the higher tariff in order to attract investor. So that's the conclusion that we have for the experience in the region. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Balaji or Bunrad, for that excellent overview of what Clean Power Asia is working on and what you're learning in the region. That was really, really helpful. And thanks so much for your leadership on these issues. We had a couple clarifying questions come in during your presentation. And the first, Bunrad, that I'd like you to address is from Mary Bounthalath, and Mary, my apologies if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. Mary asks, is Clean Power Asia already available in Lao PDR? And Balaji noted in the comments box that both Clean Power Asia and PFAN Asia are operating in Lao. But could you both, Bunrad and Balaji, speak a bit to what you're working on or doing in Lao? And then also, Mary specifically asks, how can we get local government and relevant stakeholders involved in these programs? Because public-private partnerships and renewable energy are big things in Lao. So could you both speak to that, and then we'll move into our more general discussion session.
Kunrok, you go
Okay,
ahead.
Balaji. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is Bulla speaking. So in Lao for Clean Power Asia program, actually we are working with collaborating with Lao in several aspects. The first one is that we helping MEM in Laos to try to setting up now the solar policy target, and also and how to procure solar projects in terms of achieving that target. So we are right now talking about maybe they might be interested to setting up a solar PV auction in Laos. So it's the first time that they are thinking about to do this, but we are still ongoing work with the MEM or Lao government on this.
Yeah, for us, we have been working on several smaller run-of-the-river hydro projects, and also on a few smaller off-grid solar projects mostly. The getting funding for these projects are quite a challenge for Lao at this point in time, but we are trying to work out some innovative themes for that. Yeah, the challenge is to aggregate all of them together and then go to an investor. That's what would work. That's the challenge that we have there in Lao.
Great. Thank you so much to you both for those great responses. So now comes the most exciting part of our event, which are your questions, your general questions, and your thoughts. And please, everyone, continue typing in your thoughts, your questions in the chat box. Keep those questions coming. And also, we would love to hear about the work that you are doing in Southeast Asia or in Asia more generally on these issues. And then, you know, through that, we'd like to discuss and hear any opportunities and issues that you see and encounter in your work. So feel free to type in those types of, share that with us through the comment box, and we'll raise those for discussion here. And I see we've got some great ones coming in. So again, please keep those coming. So the first question I'd like Balaji and Boonrad, you both to address, comes from Mark Berkshitsky. And Mark, thanks so much for the question. He asks, what kind of risk guarantee mechanisms exist? Does the underlying government ever provide a credit risk or safety net in the case that the off-taker defaults on its PPA? So either one of you, could you please share your thoughts on that, Boonrad or Balaji?
Boonrad, you go on this again. You're on the policy side.
Yes. I think for these questions, basically it's gonna be more like a project specific transactions and the structure. From what we have experienced, for example, the market in Thailand in the past, when Thailand start the solar projects policy back in 2007, actually at that time they have the ADIR program, and no one actually there are a lot of people apply for the permit, but no project even happen on the ground because they also the risk that when we interview the first project they developed, because the bank at that time they also not sure that they can rely on PA who is the off taker of the project or not. So at that time actually for the first project they are some structuring that try to convince the government to guarantee the credit risk. But at the end of the day, actually, it's not like what we think. The project owner themselves have to provide personal guarantee for the projects, and it help to once the project up and running, it help to reduce the perceived risk that the credit risk that we have, and the second and the third projects come online. But in this case, I think in other countries, it has to be case by case basis. So and we also working on that now, especially in Vietnamese market where they just have FIT launched recently, few months ago. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Boonrad. Really appreciate that. Please, everyone, keep your questions coming. I'd like to just share a very nice comment from Seni Fei, who is joining us from West Africa, and he says, you know, happy to be able to join this very important and useful webinar on energy in Asia, because for him, as a West African researcher on sustainable development and energy, this is a very big occasion or opportunity to be part of very important points of view and being able to share those views. So Seni, thanks so much for joining us and for your comment. As we wait for a couple additional comments, we have about 5 more minutes. So if anyone has additional comments, I see some people are typing them in right now. I would like to ask Boonrad and Balaji a question that's in my mind right now, because you're working day to day on the ground with companies, project developers, and countries across the region. based on your work, what do you see as one of the most exciting and scalable examples of private sector investment for clean energy development in the region? What stands out for you, and what feels very exciting to you right now? Maybe, Balaji, if you could take that first, and then Boonrad next.
Well, to me, the exciting opportunity lies in the energy access pockets, in the off-grid areas where the corporates can actually benefit a lot because these people have not been served. They are the bottom of the pyramid. They have not been served. We see a lot of excitement also from the investors to address this market. So we are seeing there is a lot of excitement there, but not yet a lot of action there. So that's something. But in terms of action and excitement, it's obviously the rooftop sector for self-consumption of private PPAs, as Gulrod presented earlier.
Great, thanks, Balaji. And Boonrad, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to add something to Balaji, I would say I think the landscape of renewable energy has been changing a lot compared to the last 10 years, especially on the generation cost side. So I think there are some governments still have perceived that understanding that RE is still very expensive comparing to conventional fuel. And but the exciting thing is now it's not like that for all sectors or in different countries. Actually, there are some area or some sector or some specific countries that RE is much more competitive compared to conventional options that they have available in that area now. So I think this is the thing that exciting that government can looking at and identify those area and just provide framework or something that allow RE to be much more scaled up. Why they don't have to provide any support or incentive because the cost already effective enough for RE to be go on to the grid or even off grid market. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Boonrad. We have another question coming in from Jumana, and I see Balaji. Wow, you are a multitasker. Balaji is able to do this in person and also like type in fantastic responses to the comments field at the same time. Thank you for that. But maybe if we could just discuss this question a little bit, because Boonrad, I think it relates to your work in Clean Power Asia as well. Jumana notes that that PFAN covers the hospitality sector, which is not energy-intensive sector, meaning the payback periods are long, impact on cash flow is slow. So what is the value proposition for investors in this case? And maybe, Balaji, if you could just mention your thoughts on that, and then Boonrad, if you have any thoughts to add as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, the hospitality sector, actually, the opportunity lies in the business case. The business case for several of these hotels, if you may say, is in upgrading their facilities so that they become targets for companies like Accor or Sheraton to come and take over and manage them. So if they kind of do not do that, then these companies are not anymore interested to do that. So that's the business case to do it. So it's not purely just payback on the energy investment and returns, but it's also on enhanced business opportunities for them. So that's the thing. But a combination of these interventions that I have mentioned there could be something like bringing about. We have seen paybacks from 3 years to 6, 7 years. So in most of these cases, that's been interesting enough for investors to come in to put in their debt and equity.
Great. Thank you so much, Balaji. And Boonrad, please, your thoughts on this.
Yeah, to add to Balaji for hospitality sector, actually, if you're looking the load profile for this sector, normally the business in this sector will run 7 days a week. And basically, if we're looking at their load profile, it doesn't matter right now whether they are energy intensive sector or not. If they can run 7 days a week, there is a way to cut their energy saving by putting solar on the roof and install smaller than their load. Basically, they can save energy and save the bill compared to their, because they run exactly match with the solar load profile in 7 days a week. And we can identify that market by the retail price that they buy in the market. For example, in Thailand, if they buy during the peak hours, now the LCOE of solar PV project is much cheaper than the peak rate that we have, and it happened also in Cambodia and Philippines. So this sector can be done with the solar rooftop to cut costs and get quick payback for solar PV rooftop.
Just to add to
Wow,
that,
excellent. Thank you so much. Go ahead. Yeah, Balaji, please.
to add to that, utilities constitute about 25% of the total operating costs of a hotel. So they do focus on it as a big area to improve their profitability. It's not necessarily just payback.
Got it. That is a very, very good point. And thank you so much to you both for your insights on that. We are unfortunately at the end of our hour for this exciting webinar, and I'd like to thank so much Balaji and Boonrad, and also thank you to everyone who has joined us here today. For any additional questions that we didn't get to in our discussion, we will provide responses to those questions that will be shared with everyone who joined us. And we'll also send everyone a recording and copy of today's presentation that you can share with others if you wish. And that copy will also be posted on USAID's Climate Links YouTube page, where people can watch previous CEADIR series discussions as well. So with that, thank you everyone so much for a great discussion, and thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing on these issues. We really value the ability to connect and hear about your experiences and have this type of interaction. So thank you so much. Have a great day.